Brace yourself. Get it passed up anytime now. Collect yourself. Things will never be the same in a sad, sad world.
Welcome, everybody. Good to be with you today. Today we move on to our lesson on Christianity. Before we do that, it bears mentioning that of all the lessons we have in this class this year, this is the one with the most potential to touch on issues that are sensitive topics for some people. That's because Christianity is by far the majority religion in our own culture. Just by the law of averages, it's almost certain that the majority of people in this room are Christian either by personal conviction or by family and cultural heritage. And when we take an academic approach to something that is so close to the hearts of people, definitely, almost certainly people in the room, and certainly the loved ones of people in the room, that can be sensitive. So let's remind ourselves what we do when we discuss religion in an academic context is that we're looking at the human side of religion. What is it that people believe and practice, and why, and what impact does that have on culture? It's whatever our personal convictions may be, it's not our place in this context, certainly not mine, to speculate on whether the stories that people hold by faith are true or not. That's not my place. You wouldn't want me doing that. That's like at the top of the ask me after you graduate stuff is religion stuff. So we take a neutral approach to faith claims in an academic context. And when we're doing it about Zeus or Thor, or even Judaism, which is a minority religion in our country, sometimes that can hit differently than when we do it about the faith tradition that most of us are more familiar with. When we hear a neutral statement such as this, here's a neutral statement. The Gospels claim that Jesus was born of a virgin. Now, if somebody is very religious, a very faithful religious Christian, there's a possibility that they hear an attack in a statement like that. What do you mean, claim? What are you trying to imply when you say claim? It's also possible, because there are almost certainly people in the school who come from the other perspective, that are not religious, it's not for them, don't think it's a very good thing. And there's a chance that they also hear an attack in the same statement. They may hear, yeah, but why are you leaving it at that? Why aren't you saying, but it's obviously not true? Both of those reactions, both of those perceptions of attack are in the minds of the hearers, because all the scholar has done in making a neutral statement is given a statement of fact, an undeniable statement of fact that the Gospels do indeed claim that, without taking a public position. And that's my role as a teacher, to take a public position on whether the statement is true or not. So with that in mind, let's dive in. Augustus Caesar, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man the world had ever seen. And yet for all his power, there's one thing he couldn't avoid that nobody can avoid, and that's mortality. They may have worshipped him as a living God, but he died anyway. Augustus Caesar died at 75 years old in the year 14 AD after reigning for 40 years. His ashes are long gone, but his tomb, his mausoleum, still stands. You can go to Rome and visit it. He succeeded. These are the first four people that followed Augustus Caesar. If you're an emperor, of course, you want your firstborn son to be the next emperor. That's the way royalty works. And dang it, if it doesn't seem like this family was cursed. None of them had sons. So this first dynasty, yeah, it's the family of Caesar, but all these guys are succeeded by like sixth cousins and adopted nephews and like um this one but or this one by his wife's son from a previous marriage, that kind of family. Because dang it, though, the only people on earth that just couldn't have sons were the ones who needed them the most, the emperors of Rome. So Augustus is succeeded by Tiberius Caesar. He has a pretty stable reign. He's also remembered as a fairly boring person. The historian Tacitus says of Tiberius that in the reign of Tiberius, nothing happened. We're going to find out today that that's not quite true. Check out the years of his reign. He's succeeded by Caligula Caesar, who is a stark, raving lunatic and moral degenerate. Caligula appoints his horse to the Roman Senate, and his personal life is so depraved that to make an accurate movie about Caligula, they had to make a porno. The movie about Caligula is rated X by the Motion Picture Association of America. Do not go watch it until you are grown-ups. He's succeeded by Claudius, fairly stable, also fairly boring. Caligula, by the way, how does he die? His own soldiers stab him to death. Then Caligula is succeeded by Nero, another lunatic. And we'll say more about Nero in the second half of this lesson. They carry on Augustus' tradition. The thing he's most proud of is that he's brought peace to the world, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But there's one blinking, bright, shining exception to this peace that Rome has brought. And that's the tiny little province of Judea that we talked about the past couple of days. In the 1st century and 2nd century AD, the Judean people are not at peace. There is a constant rumbling under the surface. The Jews hate the Romans. They hate that they're ruled by the Romans, and there's a constant threat of rebellion. We know how that story is going to end. 2 major rebellions, the one in 70 that gets the temple destroyed, the one in 136 AD that gets the Jews expelled from their own homeland in Judea. But let's rewind the clock. Let's rewind the clock to about the year 40 AD. So the Jerusalem temple is still standing. Everything seems normal, and yet just under the surface, there are tons and tons and tons of tensions because the Jews are asking this question. When will our Mashiach, is the Hebrew term, our Messiah, this king that God is going to send us to wipe out the Romans and restore freedom to us, when is this going to happen? And when is this going to happen, by the way? Because many of them are the belief that this world has gone too wicked. Caligula, that mad emperor, he forced them to put statues of him to be worshipped in the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple. That's a big, big no-no. And the response of a lot of Jews is, you know what? God's going to destroy this whole world now. He's going to wipe it out, and he's going to start fresh with us. He's going to build a new kingdom on earth after he's destroyed all the wickedness. When you talk about the Judean people, the Jews of the 1st century, they're not a single unified body. They're not just opposed to Rome, but there are many, many groups within them. You're not being slick. I see you playing on your phone. There are many, many groups within them who are also opposed to each other. One of the groups is these fellas. They're the Sadducees. These are the people on top of society in Judea. They're the Jewish priests and the Jewish lawyers. They are despised by almost everyone else because they're considered to be collaborators with Rome. They're in league with the Romans. The Romans are paying them off to be pro-Roman. And so everybody else who's much less wealthy than the Sadducees is very unhappy with the Sadducees, including this group, the Pharisees. They're sick of the Sadducees being Roman puppets and being corrupt. So the Pharisees say, we don't need our priests anymore. We're going to go off on our own with our families, and we're going to pray together that way, and we're going to study our Bible that way. And who needs those Sadducees? One of these days, God's going to wipe them out, and he's going to cleanse them and give us new, better priests. Until then, we'll take care of this ourselves without any need for these priests. After the temple's destroyed, this is the group that is going to turn into the rabbis. Today's Judaism is descended from this group, but in the first century, it's this one that's on top. We've got a group called the Essenes. The Essenes say this society is so corrupt and terrible that we're going to leave it. And they go out in the desert. They establish monasteries. They're monks. They're Jewish monks. They have rituals of cleansing, and they say, we're going to wait until God destroys all the corruption, all the wickedness, and then when that happens, we'll be the new chosen ones, and he'll start new with us. The Zealots do just the opposite. If the Essenes say, we don't want to be part of the world anymore, the Zealots say, we're going to take over. These are the warriors, guerrilla warriors, terrorists even. And their response to Rome is to sneak up and kill Romans whenever they can. Kill the soldiers, kill the Roman government officials, kill Jewish men married to Roman women, kill anyone who is a traitor to Israel in their mind. You've got the followers of St. John the Baptist. His origins are mysterious. He may have been with the Essenes for a time. He goes out in the desert and he says, what we need to do is recreate the time of Moses. Remember the story yesterday or the day before when the Hebrew slaves are led from freedom out of Egypt and they cross the Red Sea into the promised land. So John takes his followers back out in the desert and he baptizes them, washes them in water, and that's supposed to be a symbolic recreation of crossing the Red Sea. And now when you come through the water, you're entering a new promised land. And he thinks if you do that, you come out a new creation, and we can get rid of corruption and make something new that way. He runs into trouble with the Roman puppet king, Herod, who he ends up with his head on a silver platter. The phrase head on a silver platter, if you've heard it, comes from St. John the Baptist. He is the teacher of Jesus before Jesus went out on his own. You've got a group called the God-fearers. The God-fearers are not ethnically Jewish, but they like the message of Judaism, the idea of there being only one God, the idea that God wants you to be kind to the poor and love your neighbor and all that stuff. So they go to the synagogues and worship sort of in the back seats, but they never take the plunge. They never become full-blown Jews. Judaism was not a religion that went out trying to make converts. You don't have Jews knocking on your door saying, have you ever considered becoming a Jew? That doesn't happen. They allow converts, but you've got to go to them and say, I want in. And if you're a dude, there's one big thing holding you back from converting if you're a fella. Because to become a male member of the Jewish people, you have to be circumcised. And so in the first century, there are a lot of people like, hey, I like a lot about this, but I'm just going to stay in the back and listen and I'll pray with you. But scissors are not for me. The newest of the movements within Judaism in the first century are the Christians. And that we say it that way intentionally. The beginnings of Christianity and the earliest Christians are a movement within Judaism. All the first Christians are Jews. They continue to identify as Jews. So it's one of the many first century Jewish movements. This fella here, old timer right here, this is St. Paul. What you're about to hear is the oldest existing piece of writing from a Christian and the oldest existing mention of Jesus. It comes from about the year 50 AD. It's from the first letter of St. Paul to the Christian church in Thessaloniki, a Greek town. You also hear it referred to just as First Thessalonians. Paul and his friends Silvanus and Timothy to the church of the Thessalonians in God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace to you and peace. We give thanks to God always for all of you, constantly mentioning you in our prayers, remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. If you had, St. Paul, he's the most influential Christian of all time. If you had bumped into him 15 years earlier, 15 years before he wrote this, and said, you know, Paul, or his other name, Saul of Tarsus, you know, Saul, you're going to go down in history as the most influential Christian of all time. And you're going to write most of the documents that are going to be considered sacred scripture by Christians. He'd have laughed in your face and maybe killed you. Because 15 years before he wrote this, this is him. Around the year 35 AD, the future St. Paul is part of a mob that organizes and carries out the murder of St. Stephen. St. Stephen is the first Christian martyr, the first person to be killed because he's a Christian. St. Paul's role was he was young at the time, and he held all the coats of the people who did the actual killing. They stoned him to death. That's when you bash somebody with rocks until they're dead. St. Paul held their jackets so they didn't get blood on them. St. Paul hated Christianity and Christians, and he made it his life's mission. He went from town to town to town among the Jewish communities. And if he found out any of them were talking about this Jesus stuff, he would have them arrested. He would have them killed for years and years and years. How did he go from being, you know, the number one Christian hunter to the number one Christian? We'll find out soon. But first, we got to go back to the beginning of the movement. Back to Jesus of Nazareth himself. Nazareth is a small town in the region of Galilee in the north of Judea. And Galilee is a poor region. It's a country region. It's not looked on as sophisticated. They speak with a thick accent, and people from the rest of Judea make fun of their accent. You know, it'd be their equivalent of our deep south. One account of how Jesus starts his work is he's Jewish, of course. If we didn't know that, he's Jewish. He goes to the synagogue to worship on Saturday, just like he always does, and perfectly normal. He's going to get up and he's going to read the Bible in the synagogue. He's going to read the scriptures. And here's how it goes, according to the Gospel of Luke. Jesus came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, and as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, that's in the Hebrew Bible, was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me, Mashiach, anointed one, to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. So far, perfectly normal. That's what you do. When it's your turn, you get up and you read the reading and you sit down and shut up. But he wasn't ready to sit down and shut up yet. So this account goes. He looks at them and he says, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. So in this account, he begins his public ministry by standing up and saying, everything our people has, all the stories our people have told for 1900 years, has all been leading up to me in this moment. It's a massive claim. He then travels from city to city to city, gathering followers and proclaiming his unique message. Can we do justice to something as complicated as the message of Jesus in one slide in a presentation? No, but we're going to try. Here's my summary of what his ideas. When he went from town to town, here's the stuff he was saying. First, he advocates peaceful resistance to evil. He's not one of these zealots he doesn't like the Romans either, but he's not saying cut their throats. He's saying love one another. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. If someone punches you in the cheek, turn the other cheek instead. He wants peaceful resistance to evil. He says we should put emphasis on the justice tradition of the Bible, the stuff about taking care of the orphan and the widow and the foreigner. That's more important than the ritual stuff, the burnt offering, sacrifices on the altar. He's not against that stuff. He's a Jew like any other Jew, but he says loving your neighbor as yourself is what's most important. He says that the whole community has the responsibility to take care of everyone in the community. That if you see somebody suffering, if you see somebody hurting, if you see somebody starving, you say, well, I don't know him. It's not my problem. If I've got extra and you've got nothing, he would say, and I don't help you, then my extra I've really stolen from you. That we all have the responsibility to take care of one another. He stands up against corruption in the religious leaders, and he doesn't mince words. Those Sadducees, the most powerful people in Judea, the priests who were taking all this money from Rome and doing Rome's bidding, he calls them out to their face. He says, you are just like your father, the devil. They don't like that, but he's not afraid. He says that selfish and sinful attitudes are just as bad as behaviors. He says, you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. But I tell you, if you look at your brother with hatred in your heart, you're already liable for judgment. He recognizes that the attitudes we have inside can rot us from the inside. And they're really, our behaviors are born out of those attitudes. He says wealth should be given to the poor. There's a story in one of the Gospels are his ancient biographies of Jesus. There's a story in one of them where this rich young man comes to him and he says, Jesus, I've been following you. I follow all the religious laws in the Bible. I'm doing everything right. What more do you want from me? Just one thing. Simple, really. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and then you'll be perfect. It says the man goes away and weeps because he's not willing to do that. Jesus says celibacy is the ideal, that the best case scenario, we wouldn't get married, we wouldn't start families, we would dedicate our whole selves to serving God and the poor. But he also says, I realize most people can't do that, and that's okay. If you do get married, though, marriage vows are permanent. In his culture, a dude can kick his wife out at any time for any reason. You marry a pretty young girl, she has 5 kids, she's not so pretty, she's not so young anymore. All right, see ya. You don't owe her anything. Kick her out, trade her in for a new model. Jesus says, nope. He says, I don't permit divorce. And I don't think he's trying to be more strict and add extra rules, because that's not really his thing. He's trying to protect the women. See, if you're that woman who gets thrown out by her husband after having 5 kids, guys in the first century, they only want to marry young virgins. They don't want to marry a used woman. Excuse the way of putting that, but that's the attitude at the time. And so what do these divorced women end up doing? Starving to death or becoming prostitutes. And he says, not on my watch. You marry somebody, you take that vow, it's forever. What God has joined together, let no man render asunder. He says that we relate to the Lord. Remember, that's the name of the God of Israel. We relate to the Lord as sons and daughters. If you search the whole Hebrew Bible before the time of Jesus, it's hundreds of pages, and the language of father is used about God like 2 or 3 times in the whole Hebrew Bible. It's all Lord and King and Master. For Jesus, okay, those things too, but Jesus' most common word for God is, his language is Aramaic. And in the Aramaic language, it's Abba, which isn't even father, it's daddy. Abba, that's, it's like Papa, daddy is his language for God. Speaking of that daddy, though, that Abba, one of these days, very soon, though, yes, he's a loving father, but he's also an angry father, and he's coming soon to put an end to all our nonsense. So his father's going to show up any day now and cleanse the earth and establish a kingdom. And then the last big part of his teaching is that he acknowledges, he says, yeah, it's me, the guy you've been waiting for, the Messiah, the anointed one. He says, it is me. And Kayla, go ahead and wake up for me, please. Wake her up so she doesn't be a zero. Toward the end of his life, it's not known for sure how long he was active, going from town to town teaching. There's 4 Gospels, 4 ancient biographies. Matthew, Mark, and Luke make it sound like about a year. John makes it sound like about 3 years. However long it was, it clearly wasn't a super duper long time. And at the end, after spending all this time wandering around in the country, he goes to the poor areas. He goes to the other side of the tracks, so to speak. At the end, he heads to the capital, Jerusalem, where the rich people are, where the important people are. He goes to Jerusalem and he goes to the temple, the holiest place for all the Jews. And there he finds a money-making machine. The temple is full of corrupt people splitting profits with Rome and making money off all the worshipers, selling them animals to sacrifice at an exorbitant rate, and selling trinkets and prostitution and all sorts of. They've turned the temple basically into a shopping mall. In fact, his words are, "You have made my father's house a den of thieves." And so he leads a riot, an insurrection. He knocks over the temples, or the tables of the money changers. Says, I don't know what he makes them out of, but he actually makes whips to beat the people who are buying and selling and making this a money-making scheme. Usually when the story's told, it looks about like this: Jesus versus a table of guys. The temple had about 20,000 employees present at any given time. What we should probably imagine when we hear this story is not one guy knocking over a table with a dozen guys, but we should imagine an insurrection. We should imagine him at the head of a large group of his followers who are storming and taking over. And that gets Rome's attention, because the place that makes the most money in all of Judea pays the most taxes in all of Judea. Who's getting half of this money? Yeah, the money changers are getting some. The Romans are getting the rest. And once you mess with Rome's money, now Caesar's interested. Augustus is dead at this point. Jesus is born under Augustus. Tiberius is emperor now. He doesn't intervene, but the Romans do. Jesus is arrested, traditionally betrayed by one of his followers, and put on trial by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And what happens when you stand up to Rome? Yeah, you get crucified. And so that's what happens. And don't just kill him, they mock him. They make a joke out of him. Oh, you're the Messiah, the anointed one, this great king that's to come. So they weave a crown of thorns and jam it into his scalp. And they hang a sign over his head, so the gospel story says. It says in 3 languages, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Here's your king. They point and they laugh as he dies. He had an inner circle of 12 disciples. We use that word early in the class. It just means teacher or learner. That's why every subject we study is an academic discipline. He had a lot of followers, but 12 were his inner circle. He probably picked the number 12 because there were 12 tribes of Israel. And all those tribes were believed to be descendants of 12 different grandchildren of Abraham. So Jesus gets 12 lead followers because he says, we're going to remake Israel. We're starting over from scratch. And so here are my new 12 leaders, patriarchs. Their plan to make Israel new, to renew everything, has hit quite a snag as their master, their leader, lies dead in his tomb. That's a major problem for the movement that he had started. And this is when the 12 claim to have experienced, even after death, claim to have experienced Jesus as risen from the dead. And they say that he came to them still alive, even though he had died, and he made them, they've been disciples, now he makes them apostles. It's a word that means messengers. The reason see how I've highlighted the P-O-S-T in apostle? It's because it's a Greek word that has the same root as our word post office. It is related to the word apostle. What's a post office do? It distributes messages. The apostles are like the mailmen carrying his message, even though he has died. They say, yes, he was dead, but now he's alive and he sent us to carry on his mission until he comes back. Of the early followers of Jesus and the early leaders of the church, 3 are the most prominent. One is St. Peter. St. Peter was the leader of the apostles. He starts churches in Antioch, Syria, and ultimately in Rome. St. James was the brother of Jesus. He was the leader of the church in Jerusalem. St. John, traditionally considered to be the youngest of the apostles and also to be the best friend of Jesus. He lives to be the oldest, and he's the only one who dies of natural causes traditionally. He lives well into his 90s. All the others are murdered. Last thing we need to talk about today, and then we'll do the rest tomorrow. We started off with St. Paul, writing that letter to the Thessalonians. He wrote plenty of other to the churches of Rome and Galatia and Corinth and so on, writing the oldest existing Christian literature, being the most influential Christian of all time. How did he get that way? Because he started out killing them. Started out, if you're a Christian, you hear a knock on the door and it's Saul of Tarsus standing there, you want to run out the back, because he has not come to sell you magazines or to build you a tent. That's his profession, but that's not why he's at your door. He's at your door to kill you. How does he end up being the most influential Christian of all time? The way he tells it, he says he's on his way to Damascus, a Syrian town. It's still around. It's in bad shape these days because of the Syrian civil war, but it's a great ancient city. He's on the road to Damascus, he says, and a light shines from the heavens. He falls off his horse, and he looks up, and there's a figure standing there. There's no indication, I should say, there's no indication that Paul ever met Jesus during Jesus' life. But there Jesus stands before him, Paul says. Dead? Yep, not anymore. The risen Jesus, he says, appeared to him. He doesn't give all the details, but you can read details in the New Testament in the book, The Acts of the Apostles. And in that version, this voice says, Paul, his Hebrew name is Saul. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you? He says, I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting because you mess with my people. Now I'm ad-libbing. You mess with my people, you mess with me. So, sorry, what can I do? He's sort of afraid, you'd imagine. Here's this figure from the heavens, and you've been killing his followers. You imagine, all right, it's time for the wrath of God. And instead, as the story goes, Jesus said, clearly, you're good at what you do. And clearly, again, this is ad-libbing. Clearly, when you believe in something, nothing can stop you. I want you on my side. And Jesus, Paul says, Jesus makes him another apostle. This guy who's been killing Christians now can't sit still. He goes all over the empire. Everywhere a ship can take him, preaching about Jesus, starting churches, spreading Christianity, town to town to town to town to town. The 12 Jesus followers during his life, for years, they don't leave Judea, and they only talk to other Jews. Paul goes everywhere and talks to everyone. He travels all over the empire. And Paul's message, this is going to get him in trouble, spoiler alert, is that Jesus, not Caesar, is the true Lord and King. It's not going to go down so well when Caesar finally hears about it. Everywhere he goes, he's also raising money for the church back in Jerusalem, which does not like him. I don't think you can blame them for not trusting Paul, who spent 15 years killing them. Paul's the first to take Christianity to Europe, where it will become the majority religion eventually. He even goes to Athens. This is according to the Acts of the Apostles of the New Testament. Home of Socrates, Plato, and Samurai. Who's your favorite? Oh, she's sleeping. And Samurai's favorite, Aristotle. He goes to Athens. He stands in the Areopagus. That's where Socrates was tried. That's where all the important discussions in Athens take place. And he preaches to the Greeks. They have a bunch of altars to all their gods there. And one that says to an unknown God. And Paul stands up and he says, what you worship in ignorance, I will reveal to you in truth, and preaches Christianity to the Greeks. What happens next is a tomorrow us problem. That's all we need. That's all I need from you for today. More tomorrow.
Around a lot of bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. What I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So slip back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me.